You can probably tell things look a bit different today. To celebrate my 50th episode, I thought that I would um, spring for some new software. So I'm trying out a new video editor. We'll see how that goes, trying Camtasia. And also I thought I would bring you something a little different in the astronomy corner today. There's a problem that has always fascinated me in celestial mechanics called Barrow's problem. And this is a special example, special case of the three-body problem in celestial mechanics. Probably not all of you know that the three-body problem is basically an unsolvable problem. That is, if you have two masses like the Earth and the Sun, it's actually quite easy to figure out how what the Earth's orbit will be for all time going around the Sun. As soon as you add a third body, though, it becomes intractable. All you can do is approximate the motion with computers, and you can no longer solve it exactly mathematically. Anyhow, so about 100 years ago, someone came up, Meisel, I think, came up with this idea of a special three-body problem that had three masses. It's a very idealized problem. So the three masses had there's like 3 points, three stars or whatever you want to think of them, had masses of units of 3, 4, and 5, and placed like they are here, as you can see, on the vertices of a 3, 4, 5 right triangle. And the question that was posed was, well, if you let these masses, start out at rest, what happens? How does the system evolve? And Barrow got his name attached to the problem because he worked on it hard with paper and pencil, trying to solve it, and did a fairly creditable job. But it was totally beyond the ability of someone with paper and pencil to do. Except that there's a strange story going around that Barrow guessed the correct answer, which or one facet of the correct motion, which is that eventually the three unit mass body gets kicked out of the system. And so I wanted to show you today how, with a numerical simulation that someone did on the internet, a fellow named Superwillem64. This is these are the three bodies starting out. So remember, the green body is the lightest one, the 3-unit mass. So 4 and 5 have a couple of close interactions here early on with one another, and 3 tends to hang around out in the outer reaches. Now, motion like this ends up being chaotic. That's why it's so hard to predict what's going on. It's extremely difficult to get the right answer, and that's because of these really close approaches that happen. And as you can see in the kind of the early going here of the evolution of this system, what happens is that mass 5 hangs out here in the center, the blue one, and 4, which is the red one over here, goes and every now and then does a do-si-do, a close approach with the massive unit 5 masses. And then when the blue guy goes on the other side there, he interacts with the green, the 3-unit mass, and sends him back and forth out. So he's kind of doing it, swinging 2 different partners out here that are keeping him in his place. Now, of course, such an arrangement can't go on forever, and of course it doesn't. Every now and then you'll see everything almost come to a halt, and they stop and start coming back in, and there's some close approaches. That was quite a close approach with 3 and 5. And now we're getting on into the lifetime of the system, but it's been going for quite a while, quite a few orbits. So, probably a dozen or 15 orbits that have happened, and 4 and 5 had a close approach there, and 4 got cast out back in this direction toward the bottom. And coming up pretty soon here, you'll see an interesting thing that happens, and that's that the green mass almost gets ejected from the system. So it gains enough energy from the other two that they get bound to one another. So the red and the blue are orbiting each other, and the green one picked up energy, and it's just about has the necessary energy to get out of escape the system entirely. But not quite. It gets out to a great distance, and here 4 and 5 are still orbiting, but eventually they get kind of pulled back by the influence of this 3-unit mass guy. And then he makes a darting pass right through the center of him. And that time he did pick up enough energy to go flying out of the system. And 4 and 5 then remain happily thereafter orbiting one another. And this sort of thing you can expect to see with in stellar systems as well. If there are 3 stars that are close to the same distances apart, like we had here with 3, 4, and 5, you get this chaotic interaction, and it's suspected that often the 2 heavier stars will end up orbiting each other, and a lighter star will then get thrown out of the system. But the details of it vary, and of course the lighter star doesn't always get thrown out. So now on to the chess. Okay, so playing Ken this week. I've played Ken a lot of times in the past, mostly with d-pawn openings. We had played a Caro-Kann once, and I thought I'd repeat that experiment, and so I was pretty well prepared for it, but it didn't go exactly the way I planned. But I'll show you the game here. I opened up with e4, and we got very quickly into the so-called Panov attack, or Panov-Botvinnik attack. And this is a pretty standard position that we reached with the 4 knights here. And black has a couple of different options here. The safest thing, probably most solid thing, is to play e6, which is what Ken did. A more speculative but interesting line of play is to play the bishop out to g4, because then that allows white to play on the queen side with his queen. Ken didn't do that, and instead played solidly, so I went in for a more positional treatment as well to try to grab space on the queen side. And he continued to develop. I pushed the pawn to get a pawn formation and a region on the queen side that I could maintain. I was a little worried, as you often are with a forward pawn formation like this, that it would come under fire, and at some point he might very well play b6, and that at least has the potential to really cause a disruption here, attacking the head of my pawn chain. He didn't do that immediately. Instead, he castled, which gave me time to play my bishop to d3. Book move here is bishop to b5. Putting pressure immediately on the black queen side, but I didn't do that. And then he did attack my pawn chain, but this has given me time now to go ahead and support it. And he played a6. Now the reason for this, if I go back a half move here, the reason for this is that there's a threat of, if he played a5, which looks reasonable, a5 followed by trading off the pawns and getting my rook, which is unprotected here. If he played a5 at this point, then white could just simply respond with b5, and the knight would have to move. It doesn't have a lot of good choices. Probably go back to b8 again, and then after pawn to c6, I've not only got a protected passed pawn deep in the heart of his position, but it's really cramping the development. His knight basically can't develop. So this would be very bad. I didn't look at it with the engine, but yeah, plus 3.5 or something. He wouldn't want to go down a line like that. So instead he played a6, but that allows me then to kind of have my way on the queen side with my pawn. So I castled first. Of course, I was feeling pretty exposed there with my king in the center, and he was already developed and threatening to rip open the e-file perhaps. But he surprised me here. He pushed by my pawn with b5, and this just gives me a protected passed pawn, which if we ever get to a endgame with only a few pieces, that pawn will be very strong. Of course, there's a lot of chess to be played between here and there, as I found out. I put my rook on the e-file. Now the big fight here, this game is all about a battle over the dark squares, and one of them is e5, but you'll see there are other dark squares that come to be disputed, and I'm trying to prevent his freeing maneuver of e5, because right now his position is he's really cramped. He has a hard time developing his pieces any further, and if I can keep his pawn on e6 like this so his bishop can't come out, he's really got a pretty miserable game. So I was trying to put more, add as many attacks as I could. Right now, with this rook to e1, I have 3 attacks on this e5 square, and he only has the knight defending it. So certainly he can't get in the e5 break immediately. But he wants to eventually, so he plays rook to e8. I played this move, maybe I shouldn't have, but basically, to understand this move, you have to go back into the position before I played it. What I'd like to do would be to play my bishop to f4. But the problem is, well, I'll just go ahead and put it on the board. If I did it immediately, he can just attack it with the knight. And either I come back and develop in front of one of my pieces, like in front of my rook or queen, or I could come here and then he could exchange it off. I didn't want to have that, so being a little greedy, what I decided to do was to instead push the h-pawn, create loop for my king at some point, keep his knight out of g4, and most importantly of all, prepare for this bishop to f4 maneuver. But the problem is, his queen hops right onto that diagonal, and so he gets it before I can. Well, never fear, I'll figure out a way to get it anyhow. So my idea was to put the bishop there, put the queen behind it, and now with the queen support, the bishop can go to f4 and attack his queen. So that was the theory here. He meanwhile retreated his bishop, let his rook give another support. So now he's got the queen, the knight, and the rook all supporting this pawn push. So he has 3 defenses, and momentarily I only have 2 attacks. It seems like I don't have enough to prevent it. And so what gives here? How do I get away with this? Well, the idea is that this d pawn is weak, and so if he doesn't do that, but if he played e5 in this position, thinking that he finally has enough firepower there, I exchange it off. He takes with the knight. Now he can take with my knight with check. So instead, I just trade the knights off like so. And then I was going to play bishop to d4. And although it looks like a sacrifice, it really isn't, because the queen can't afford to take it. If the queen were to take this bishop, it'd simply be lost, right, to this bishop check at h7, and that followed by queen takes queen. So he couldn't take that, and instead he would have to retreat, and he can't retreat anywhere where he can keep an eye on this knight. So say he goes back to c7, I take the knight. Now if he takes back, I'd win his rook, so he has to sufficient zug with take the rooks, trade them off, and then take the bishop. And this position is very, very bad for black. My knight's about ready to take here in d5, attack his queen. That's plus 15 or so on stockfish and climbing. Anyhow, he didn't fall in for this line. And what he did do is instead of playing e5, he played his bishop to b7, which is a developing move, but, the bishop doesn't have great prospects on that square. But I think he wanted to get his rooks connected, maybe bring his a-rook over to the d-file or something. So now it's my turn to push him around a little bit. Now that I have the control over the dark squares, I can play my bishop to f4 and attack his queen. And he looked around and decided he really didn't have a better square than d8 to go back to. And I tried out the pin of his knight, thinking that maybe I could exert some pressure there, or maybe get him to make a pawn move. All he did, though, was to break the pin. And so I didn't really see anything better than to go back to this strong diagonal here that my bishop was on previously. And he retreated his bishop. And so, evidently an offer for a draw if I wanted to go through that cycle a few more times. but I didn't. So instead, I decided to come over here and form a battery of the bishop and queen, attacking h7, with the idea of maybe somehow getting into a mating pattern. He stopped that before he even started at g6. And I think not only did he want to stop that, but he also wanted to have his bishop have access to have a different way to get into the game here through g7, if you feed ghetto it. Okay, I brought my rook over to d1. The reason for that was to free up my queen from having to do extra guard duty here on d4, just centralizing the rook. He played bishop to g7. I went ahead and tried to pin now where his bishop couldn't interpose between the knight and queen, hoping I could cause him to do something that weakened his position. But instead, he just played the queen to c7 and said, okay, if you don't want that strong diagonal, I'll take it. Well, so I went back and chased him off of it again. He went back to d8. So, how about trying something else? I went to h6, thinking that maybe he'll trade bishops and invite my queen into h6, something like this, where, you know, if I might imagine getting some sort of attack if the knight comes to g5 and this pawn comes up and does an exchange or something. He didn't do that. You can kind of guess what he did. Played his queen to c7. All right, back to f4, scaring it away again. This is really trying to test my patience and see who would blink first. So I decided to move my knight in, even though it's my good knight. I should point out that, you know, this knight over here on, oops, not that knight. Take that back. This knight. Nope, not that knight. I'll get it. Hey, and the knight on c3 is kind of a sorry creature. It just doesn't have many good squares to go to. And I was looking at possible maneuvers like going through b1. b1? Oh no, sorry. That wasn't it. Let's try that again. I was looking at going to a2, to c1, and to d3, and therefore and from there into e5. But that's a lot of moves, and it's true he doesn't have very much he can do, but as soon as I block, like when I get my knight to d3, you know, I might have problems with this pawn that I've weakened, although, you know, that may still be a stronger plan than what I did. I really should have figured out a way to get that knight into the game. So instead, I moved my other knight up, which is my good knight, and of course, I wasn't really anxious to trade it off, but I wanted to try somehow to open up the position. And he dropped back with the knight. I traded knights off with an idea in mind that was flawed. So he took back with his bishop, and what happened is I made a oh, that's right. I tried one more time to see if I could maybe induce a pawn push, like the pawn to f6, but that was not to happen. Instead, when I attacked the queen, he just went back to c7. So I went back and chased him back to d8, and then I finally went into d6, which I thought was actually progress for me, because that bishop is getting into the heart of his position, and my next move was going to be queen to f4, and I thought that he would play something that he would want to get the strong bishop out of his position, and I was thinking he would play something like bishop to f8 to exchange it. And my plan was to go ahead and support it, and then when he exchanges, I would have my queen infiltrating his position, and I thought maybe I could shake something loose doing that. So I had a lot of trouble in this game figuring out how to break down his position. Anyhow, what I missed after bishop to g6 was his good move that he played, knight to b6. And all of a sudden the nature of the game really changes, because the knight has been let out of jail. If I take the knight with my pawn, then he'll take my bishop, and this there's no way I can support this pawn. It'll eventually be lost. All right. If I take, he'll take, and now this pawn will be lost on a couple moves. So I'll be down a pawn. That's no good. So I had to do something. I played, and the problem is that his knight, looking at this position, the knight's coming into c4, where it'll fork the a pawn here, and also my queen. I have to do something, so I moved my queen first, got it out of trouble, and so that when he came in with the knight, and now he's just forking two ways. He's forking my pawn and my bishop, but I moved my bishop with tempo, attacking his queen, and then my idea was then I would have time to defend my pawn. He played the queen out to f6, and now I dropped back with my knight to defend the pawn. And, you know, I didn't feel too bad at this point. My knight's finally getting into the game. Maybe it's some, you know, I was thinking about the rook defending the pawn, and then, you know, something like having the rook come into the game like this. And also or the knight could also come in through these squares, or just exchange off his knight if it was a possibility too. Anyhow, that's what I was thinking about. Instead, he went ahead and exchanged right away, and I took back. And now he made another move I just didn't see at all. I really should have seen it. Knight to b2. Simple enough. It's attacking my rook, and if I move the rook to a safe square like c1, then this pawn on d4 drops. And if that pawn drops, then all of a sudden he has connected passed pawn and a really strong pawn center. It looks very bad for white. So the only square to go to is there, but then he just plays his knight back, attacking it again. And there's no way to get out of this, because if I want to stay on this file, my two squares are either d1 or d3, and with his knight move, he can just come back and attack me again. So it's a repetition of position. Now, it turns out that black has better. I mean, black can actually play for the advantage here with moves like a5 is a possibility, or f6, not f6. I forget what else there was, looking at the position. But he actually, you know, after I say I move the rook back or up to d3, it would be a reasonable place to go in order to defend the pawn. Then, like I said, the a5 is a good move. Let's see what else there was. Just a repetition. Okay, well, a5. That's good enough. So it was a draw, and I really didn't want to take a draw, but you know, I had 9 minutes and he had 28 minutes on the clock. So time was an issue, but more to the point, if I move my rook to where he couldn't attack it, like if I move my rook to c1, then my position, I was afraid, was just going to crumble with bishop takes d4. So that'll hurt me a bit. I only got a half a point. I'll drop down in the tournament standings, but I can climb my way back over the next couple weeks. So hope you enjoyed it this week. Thanks for sticking around, and I'll see you next week from the club. Bye-bye.